Roy Moonen is the CEO and co-founder of Made in JLM, and he's going to be leading this interview with Clark. At the end of the interview, if anyone has a very good question that's better or as good as the questions that Roy asked, then feel free to ask. Otherwise, take it from here. Clark Valberg, Roy Moonen, thank you so much, guys.
Right. I'll try to get to the point.
Roy is the reason. I just want to make a, sorry, I know you guys have already been over preambled. Like, I just want to say the Roy is the reason that I'm here today. Right? Obviously, speaking different groups, but there is no group that represents a city on the planet, okay, that brings as much passion to the work that they do as the JLM does. And I believe, again, Roy is the person I know the most. So, I believe that is, because it comes directly from Roy's heart. It's super duper uncommon. Do not take this group and what you have and Roy and the other leadership here for granted, because it's really just one of a kind.
That's so amazing to hear. Thank you. Yeah, so we met when you were here in Jerusalem a few years ago. You have a connection to Jerusalem. A lot of people don't know that. I've been following Envision from the day that our designers sent us a prototype in Envision for the first time, and it was just mind-blowing compared to whatever we had before.
You've been to my house for Shabbat in New York.
Totally, and we've been in touch since. And so where are we catching you now, and how much do you secretly miss Jerusalem and actually want to be
I don't keep it a secret. Why should I keep it a secret? I'd be there right now. I had like literally 2 trips since the beginning of the year planned that didn't end up coming to fruition. One was a family trip, then was like a little men's kind of getaway trip after Pesach, all canceled, miss it dearly. There's no place on the planet that I'd rather be, for sure.
Oh man, hope you come back here soon. And so where are we catching you now?
Seeing your door handle, just seeing like your Israeli style, those real kind of like not so user-friendly door handles reminds me of Israel. It makes me wish that I was there.
Is that a thing, or door handles? I never heard that.
Yes, it's a very Israeli door handle.
Where are you now? Are you in New York at home?
I'm in Brooklyn.
And how is the coronavirus situation kind of affecting you personally and Envision?
We're just the capital of yet another thing. Now we're the capital of coronavirus, right? Which is, it's exciting and anxious, but yeah, it was terrifying. Now it's, I see the rainbow, I see the hope, and things are beginning to cool down, and
Yeah, and so just to frame the conversation, I think that the reason we wanted you here is because you have been from day one of the most exceptionally kind of remote companies in the world, and managed to operate a beautiful kind of company and product remotely from all over the world from day one. And so coronavirus right now obviously has a big impact on the way that everybody's transitioning towards that, and kind of accelerated this process a bit. And we see companies like Twitter now announcing they're going to allow their employees to work from home. Other big companies are kind of allowing it, not maybe pushing the same strength, but doing that as well. I heard a podcast with Scott Galloway this week on Pivot, that he kind of said that he believes that offices are going to be a perk soon, and not something that is mandatory for normal companies to run. So I wanted to hear your position on it from a big picture kind of view first. Do you think that this change is that fundamental? Do you think that it's going to happen that fast? Where do you see other companies kind of right now on that scale? And I don't know, do you think that companies can become remote overnight?
Yeah, so I'll maybe point to a very important and kind of almost invisible distinction between a remote company, like a company that has an office, there's a headquarters, most of the main folks and the executive team are there, centrally kind of co-located. And there are also remote people, maybe a remote office, someplace else, maybe, some, function that's kind of, kind of sprinkled about, geographically, and then a fully distributed company. So Envision has a little bit of an unfair advantage in that we have always been a fully distributed company. That's a decision we made very early on. We played with the idea of, should we build an office where 2 people, co-founder and mine, I'll spare you the whole founding story because, you can find that someplace else. But the Kitzer, okay, we're sitting there in our office in Manhattan, I think like within a couple months of Google having opened a massive office, not many blocks away from where our office was. And so my partner was very excited about the fact that he had just bought an apartment, and the value of his apartment had, kind of tripled overnight. And, I was depressed in that every single engineer that we were speaking to, all the, we were looking to go out and hire with our new, seed round of venture money, were basically also talking to Google. And so I didn't feel like I was, charming or, visionary enough to win any of those talent battles. So it really just started as like a hack. Hey, is there a way we can hire great people, not in New York, overpay in other geographies, in exotic locations, the nether regions of the planet, like Phoenix, Arizona, Columbus, Ohio, you get Austin, Texas. So can we find these rare talents who are off, living the commuter life, right? Overpay them for their locality, and still, by the way, save a little money, here in New York. And was there a way to figure that out, right? Could we put enough intellectual energy into figuring that out and actually be able to grow a lot faster and focus on the parts of the business that ultimately determine success? Does that make sense? All right. So that's the way it started. But so the decision point was, should we be remote or should we be fully distributed? I gotten some advice very early on. I'm talking about like literally in the first 20 days of thinking about this from David Cancel, by the way, he was the CEO of Drift. He said, whatever you do, all in or all out. If you build a company where there is a place where people are not, you can't build a cohesive culture. Does that make sense? Right? If you're working for a company, me, I work at home. The people who are important, the decision makers, the people whose attention I should really be vying for, or ultimately the people who I need to get in with politically, they're all over there, wherever the there is, San Francisco, New York, up in an ivory tower, right? You get the idea? You're ultimately going to feel different. You're going to feel other, right? So this global experiment called COVID has given us all a taste of what fully distributed looks like, but I wouldn't confuse that with what remote looks like. I think there will be a challenge when we all kind of gather back together in whatever office is still, whatever office still exists, and some people decide to opt out and stay home. There'll be a challenge for, this kind of bifurcated culture, the home people versus the executive people or the important people or just the in the building people. Definitely has to be figured out.
Yeah, and maybe a tip for companies who are kind of regular office based companies and now starting to adopt a few remote practices. How does that even look like technically? How do you keep morale? How do you hire people to fit that culture?
You have to kind of make a decision. I think you have to make a really deliberate from the top decision that you want to be a cloud culture. That's the question. Where does the culture of the business live, right? Is the culture here in this office like when, for example, there are team building things, right? When you are getting together socially, when you're having, kind of a brainstorming session, which isn't like in the normal course of practical work, but hey, let's get together and think about X. Are you going to do that in a format that favors the co-locators, right? Which would be like, the way we disenfranchise people who work in offices, we'll call them co-locators, right? The people in the office, or are you going to do that in a way that really favors everyone equally? Okay, here's an example, right? No one wants to be the person on the screen, on the wall, in the conference room, kind of trying to get everyone's attention when everyone else is like speaking among themselves in the room. And you're like, hey, don't forget, I'm still here. I also have an idea. That's just not going to work, right? The only way for you to really create a flat, inclusive culture that kind of puts remote people and co-located people on the same footing is probably blowing up this whole meeting room thing altogether. I don't think you can have a room of people who are meeting and also extend that naturally in an inclusive kind of flat democratic way to people who are outside of the office. My guess is, having tried this in various formats, right? The only way to do that is literally have everybody sit at their desk. Everyone sits at their desk, even though you're in the same office, even if you're right next to each other, even if you literally slap the person next to you, right? But you have to sit at your desk and each person is on Zoom as an equal, right? That's the only way we've ever seen it work. Ultimately, anything else just creates this outside party, those guys, her over there, right? Which just isn't good for the culture. Also it's not good for collaboration because there's just different paces of collaboration. There'll be the in-room pace and then the out-of-room catching up constantly. I'll only say something if it's really, really important. I won't feel embarrassed pace.
Amazing tip for meetings and kind of more team morale. Do you have any other practical tips for workflow, productivity, just
Oh, here's
working
a
on
great, so
product?
Zoom, here's a simple matter that I think is probably could fit into the category of Zoom etiquette, right? It doesn't apply to a room like this, right? But definitely applies to a room where you have people who are working. Number one, if you don't have to be in the meeting, if you don't think that the meeting is relevant to you, everyone should feel super comfortable to just leave, right? There's Zoom lurkers who are in a meeting, they're not really sure if they have to be in the meeting, not sure if they really have anything to contribute. And so they'll just be here and they'll just be video off, right? So our policy is if you're in the meeting, video on. If you feel uncomfortable because you're not sure if you really should be in that meeting, don't go video off, just leave the meeting. It's okay. You don't have to be in this meeting. It's okay, right? But you want the meetings ultimately, I think, to be a full video, full audio, like everyone's here together. We're, our consciousness is connected. We're not off, I'll just do Slack while I'm in 3 different meetings simultaneously, kind of environment. I think that's pretty important. That'd be probably tip number 1, right?
And so I think a lot of CEOs who are used to having people in their office are also used to be able to drop in and check in on somebody and see how they're doing and see that they're in the office and kind of monitor how many hours they're working. Right. How do you do that in an environment where it's all remote?
So I had somebody ask me the other day, hey, what do I think about them not going back in the office? This is a big company that you've all heard of, right? What do I think about people not going back in the office? What if we says, well, how has productivity been? You've been out of the office for a couple months now, for at least a month. What do you think about productivity? And he said, well, I don't know. I said, well, then you have a much bigger problem, right? If you've been measuring productivity by who shows up to the office and who you happen to bump into on the way to the bathroom or the water cooler, right? Then you've been basically operating on an illusion of presence, right? Where presence somehow implies productivity. And that's obviously not the case. We've all worked in offices. We've all spent most of our time looking at funny cat videos on YouTube or Ynet. I don't know when people in Israel spend their time on the internet, but we've all done that and not been working, right? And we've also been the people who got credit for, burning the midnight oil. Oh, this guy's there at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. And we know what we're talking about. I'm just writing a book. I'm just writing blog posts for my own, I have a second job. I'm just doing it from the office. So we have to first kind of determine how are we going to operate the business in a way that it creates clarity and consciousness around outcomes. By the way, that's true whether you're in an office or out of an office. I think it just becomes more true when you're out of an office because you don't have the faulty signal of presence. Does that make sense? So this will raise the bar. I think this whole remote experiment, if people choose to extend it, will raise the bar on just project management and adherence to good operational rigor for the business, just to make sure that you're instrumenting things and paying attention to actual signal as opposed to smiles and waves and who you bump into.
I had a good tip from Scott from Bechemesh here and from Envision, who said that when you are hiring, you're not looking for people who managed a team at a kind of HQ-based company, but you're mostly looking for people who are freelancers, right? And looking for people who have an easier time working with deliverables, can manage their own time. You may be safe.
So definitely, if you want, it just goes without saying, it's just, probably obvious to everybody, but, you have to hire people in an environment like this that know how to manage themselves, right? The reality is most of you are working on projects or in companies where you can't really afford to bring people on that need to be babysitted anyways, right? It's just not, but this just kind of requires you to separate the person's self-management skills from their user experience. Does that make sense? Again, it's like this disconnected state, right? Just requires a lot of focus on the things that actually matter, as opposed to things that kind of hit you in the face, like someone's personal presence in person, right? But to Scott's point, when you find people who have run agencies, for example, you're getting a sense that, wow, this person really knows how to operate independently. They know how to operate with a clean slate of obligations and kind of build their own day and build their own workload kind of sovereignly. So we definitely favor those kinds of people and found those kinds of people to be particularly successful in kind of managing themselves in this environment. Also, just more mature people. That's in general. That's probably the one rule of thumb we think about.
Yeah. And so Envision is hiring remotely, obviously. Do you feel that more people are now going to be open to working remotely? And if so, kind of what do you look
Yeah.
for in people who should approach and maybe think about it if they haven't before?
I tell you honestly, Baruch Hashem, we've never had a challenge hiring people, remotely, because it's the kind of thing that fascinates folks. I would say that probably, in the executive capacity or in kind of senior leadership, VP level and above, there's this anxiety that you end up, that comes up in some of the early conversations. I don't know if my leadership style translates, to the online environment, that makes them anxious. They're curious, but they're anxious at the same time, which is, by the way, I think a healthy thing. And so my answer to them, and kind of like my standard line is, this is going to be really super duper weird for 1 week, right? And the second week, it's going to be like, oh, okay, I think I got this. And the third week, you're going to forget you ever worked in an office. That's generally been the case. So, our involuntary attrition rate, or voluntary attrition rate is low, because I think once people get used to the online environment, they find that their lifestyle and their work style kind of integrate in a way that is uncommon, and you have more control over things that you just never had control of before, like your schedule, right? What your office looks like. Everybody in Envision has a corner office, right? Nobody here works in a bullpen, 5 inches away from somebody who, screaming to their phone at their kids, or, we all have a lot of focused space, which is, just one of the many things that I think make this special.
Do you have any special kind of apps or tools that you found super helpful? And
it's funny. People talk about like, what's the remote tool, stack. It's the same stack that everybody uses, right? It's Zoom, it's Slack, it's email, it's Google everything, right? It's really no different. The principles for leading a company and running a kind of a operationally rigorous company remotely aren't really any different than running that kind of company locally, right? You just have fewer things to imagine, like I'll give you a good example. An example would be like brainstorming sessions, right? Those tend to be go nowhere, get together with a bunch of people, a very expensive meeting that ends in, okay, let's talk about this some other time, right? You have to be much more deliberate about agendas for meetings, expected outcomes from those meetings, DRIs for projects, right? I could say that that's true uniquely in the remote world, but the truth is it's not, right? We have a lot of expensive, wasteful meetings in an office also. So it just happens to be that when you're remote, you think about those things more often, and they kind of there's a different consciousness to those things when you're remote.
Right. And so I want to be sensitive to your time. Do you need to go soon, or do we have a few more minutes?
I'm long-winded, I told you that. Right.
Rachel,
one related tip, if I'm just going to insert a thought, right? Yeah. And this is something that would be very, very difficult to do in person, that we do all the time in this environment. I think it's a little bit of a kind of a power unlock. The one thing you can't do in person is put a meeting together with exactly the people you want in a second, right? Like, because we have to, this person's coming over here and her office is, a couple floors down, 800 people. It's not, you can't fit 800 people on one floor, right? Everybody gets that, right? So you have to figure out what conference room you're meeting in, make sure you book that meeting. There's a whole build up process to getting the right people in a room at a company this size. You get that, right? Here, obviously, we can do that in 2 seconds. If I decide, oh, Roy, we need Roy, got to bring Roy into this meeting. We're 2 clicks away and Roy's in the meeting, doesn't matter where his desk happens to be. The opposite is also true. When a meeting is over, right, people in offices tend to take up the total amount of time allotted for every meeting. We booked an hour. We were done talking about everything important the first 15 minutes. So let's just shoot the breeze for the next 45 minutes. Let's just hang out here because we booked the time and nobody else has anywhere to go, right? When you're in this kind of environment, we all have other things we could be doing. And so we're never afraid to end a meeting early, right? This is like another big side in online meetings. If the meeting is over, if the content has been delivered, if the decisions have been made, if the DRIs have been defined, end the meeting. It doesn't matter what time it is. Just end the meeting, everybody go off and do their own thing, right? And it saves us a lot of time and allows us to just do a lot more and more dynamically.
And do you feel that there is kind of, people are talking about Zoom fatigue, when you have too much kind of online meetings, it's really hard to keep up. Do you feel that something is missing in the tools that we have today to keep you energized in the same way that a one-on-one interaction could, or you get used to it after you're doing it now?
I guess we probably are used to it, or I could just be walking around fatigued all the time. I'm not sure. I'll tell you one thing that we do tend to do. If you had in-person meetings, like I don't know how many of you work at, say medium to larger size organizations or work in an executive capacity, your whole day can be filled with meetings. But there's no way your day is filled with back-to-back meetings, like 8 meetings in a row with no gaps in between. This would be impossible. You're going to different locations, the build up and breakdown time. That happens here in the Zoom world. The frictionlessness can often kind of create like every minute of the day is turned into a meeting, and I'm going from one meeting directly into the next meeting with no time in between. You can't eat, you can't go to the bathroom, right? So we just have to be much more deliberate about how we kind of space between meetings. Just another little tip, right? Keep in mind that with the advantage of being frictionless, and you can also destroy people's days by dragging them into one thing after another with no gap in between.
Okay, I'm going to take a few questions from the chat here. I have some people who send me over private messages. If you have a question for Clark, feel free to add it to the group chat. So I have a question from Hanan about the product, Envision. Can you talk a bit about working in Envision collaboratively? What is the thing that you figured out there about how people can work together on a design without actually meeting each other, and how?
No product plugs. Whenever I have speaking engagements, I do no product plugs. Envisionapp.com.
Not too much.
Everything you want to know about Envision App, you can find out at envisionapp.com.
All right. I have another question. Do you ever meet? Do you have like meetings where the company come together? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So by the way, just because we're a remote company doesn't mean that we're against meeting people in person. It's important. The question is, what are you accomplishing when you're getting together in person, right? Here's the wrong way to get together in person. Hey, Tevi, let's assume I'm working with Tevi. Tevi, it's good to see Tevi here. We got to get to the bottom of this problem. We got to put our head together on this new project. Let's get together. We'll all fly into Chicago, right? Or I'll go over to your house, right? And we'll kind of, we'll do a meeting, and we'll get it done. We'll get through it. We'll have this big epic moment of resolution on some important business topic, right? That we do not do, right? Because if you start doing that, all of your important decisions will be pushed off until when that person can get together in person. When you're a distributed company, you absolutely should get together in person, but you should get together in person to get to know each other, to connect socially, right? Team building, reviewing kind of the quarter, right? Kind of, quarterly business review, yearly business review, right? It should be kind of high level, to inspire each other, right? For example, we have a big all hands meeting once a year. Last year we were in Phoenix, the year before that we were in LA, 100% of the entire company, all in one place. We took over a whole resort in Phoenix, Arizona, right? And it was like, we had keynotes and we had breakout sessions, but we didn't try to make a business decision that was critical to the operation of the business in that moment, right? We didn't push off an important conversation or an important kind of, consideration, right? We didn't push it off until that meeting happened. I think that would be dangerous, right? You want to allow the culture to remain, at a steady cadence and keep everybody connected and moving forward constantly. The main goal of IRL, we call it Envision IRL in real life. The main goal of IRL and all of our IRL experiences are to allow people who work together to finally get to know each other as people, right? Every person you have in your life, exists up here. You have a little model, little scale replica of them, right? If you've met them only online, that replica has a certain fidelity, right? A certain definition. Oh, I know they like this, I know like this. But the more you get to know them and the more shared experience you have, and some of those shared experiences just can only happen in person, the higher fidelity that little scale model of that person becomes in your head, right? And it changes the way you relate to them, right? This is important. When you get together frequently, right? But get together to get to know each other as people. Because that new understanding of that person then translates into the online environment, and the work you do together becomes better. Does that make sense? Right? You don't have the in real life person and then the online person. The online person, the work person, actually that relationship becomes stronger because you spend time in person. So yes, we get together at least once a year, entire company, all hands, and then the teams get together, all of marketing, all of engineering, all of, they get together in individual teams, even more regular basis. And the executive team gets together, once a quarter, sometimes more often.
Yeah, and I think that this topic of how do you create culture and what is the leadership style that's needed to make these connections on a regular basis, not only at events, is something that's interesting. I'm getting in a few different versions of questions. Lulu is asking.
Sorry, I'm not watching the questions. My apologies.
No, it's okay. Lulu is asking, how do you enhance the culture and employee connection? What type of team building exercise do you conduct virtually? How often, if ever, do you meet in person?
Okay. I'll
that.
answer one of those.
Maybe on the virtual side and on the kind of leadership and connecting people.
So we have all kinds of special interest groups in Slack. Many of you probably have the same. We have a group of people who just like to brew beer. We have a whole other group of people who like meditation. Right? I'm a big meditation guy. So, we have our meditation group. We have something called Envision Booty, which is the people who get together at 7 a.m. and do runs, right? There's a group of people who literally run together as a group in real life, wherever they happen to be. And there's a group in Slack that talks about that. So special interest groups in Slack are important, right? You have to allow people to connect to each other, even though, even in the online environment, around things that they're personally passionate about. It's hard to tell two people, hey, Roy and Ben, connect, right? Find the common thread, right? Which, by the way, we all have so many common threads, especially in a group of 3 or more people. There's so much diversity of thought and interest, but there's also things that we find in common. So we have like a wine tasting Slack group. We have people who have pets. So I think find the common threads and allow people to connect to each other on interests that they have personally. That's one tip. On the team building exercise, I'll tell you my favorite in-person team building exercise I think we've ever done was like an improv class. I thought that was a lot of fun. We actually brought in like a professional improv, acting trainer, and they took us through a couple hours of, playing out different scenes. It was fun. Again, no real work done, clearly. No, let's talk deeply about your personality and how it shows up at work. We do those kinds of things too. We have diversity, equanimity, and inclusion, thing that we go through, which is fascinating and definitely dives into real work related things. But, I think it's also important to just keep it fun, keep it light, and get to know each other, and, mix it up so that you see people in a different angle.
Did you do the goats? I saw that Nadav tagged you on the farmer who brings goats to Zooms. That's.
I didn't know about the goat guy. Is there a goat guy, Nadav?
I need a goat guy. It looks really good.
See, even I'm missing out on the goat guy.
Maybe to balance a bit of a technical question. I have two technical questions. One is, do you measure time? Do you track time or just measure KPIs?
Absolutely not. If you're hiring people in a tech, job, at a company like ours, or like most of the work that you guys do, and you have to track their time, you're hiring the wrong person, right? If you're using time logged as a measure of success, you're looking at the wrong thing, I think.
Are you using any other framework for measuring KPIs or
we use
goals, OKRs?
OKRs, KPIs, cascading all the way down the organization.
Right.
So, quarterly, KPIs and, departmental level KPIs, and then that kind of cascades down through every team.
Right.
And we have an all hands meeting, obviously, once every 2 weeks, Envision all hands, just like this, everybody in the entire company. We have all kinds of interesting programming and MVPs. And so that, we do many of the things that people do in person. We just bring them online.
What is your remote hiring process like?
Really not that different, than, the process of most companies who happen to be in San Francisco and are hiring people anywhere in the world and hope that they'll move there, right? Panels, one-on-ones, you get the idea. I would say probably as a matter of practice that has evolved over time, I generally do not hire a VP or above that I have not met in person at least once. So let's say if we're looking for an executive, we'll fly candidates into New York. So rather than us go to them, we fly them into New York, and we'll fly the other folks that need to meet with that person, that are part of the kind of closely knit, approval committee, decision-making committee, fly those folks into New York, right? And then we'll do kind of end-to-end meetings for a day or two, sometimes working sessions, but Generally speaking, I think you need to actually meet somebody in person if you're hiring them to be a significant impact on your company culture. At the end of the day, culture is like one of those kind of elusive words and ideas in business. I think of culture as a user experience, right? You walk into an office, you might say, oh, I like your culture. Maybe you just mean the fact that they have cool posters up and great music and a ping pong table and free Fresca. You easily understood. You can easily understand it that way. When you're a remote company, again, it kind of forces you, definitions are really become different, right? Your culture is kind of the guardrails of social acceptance, right? Like how do people treat each other, right? Does that make sense? And ultimately that's defined by the character of each individual person. The picture of your culture becomes a composite of the individual pixels that are the character of each individual you hire, right? The higher up in leadership, the more people that person manages, the bigger their pixel becomes, right? If you hire, you make a mistake and you hire just somebody who just doesn't fit into the culture, somebody who, you hire a jerk, right? If they're an IC, very limited damage they can do to your organization. Still don't do it. You should be incredibly principled about this. You should have a no jerk policy, low plug, okay? Right? It's my little Hebrew popping through, right? However, if you make a hire like that at the leadership level or at the executive level, it's just, it's catastrophic. It can set you back years. So this is only relevant to us, but Envision has defined principles. I have each little principle has a card, okay? So Envision principle number 1 is humility, right? All the executives, by the way, everybody in the entire company has these little cards in their desk. I just happen to have this little setup here, right? And we reward, we MVP, acknowledge, during the all hands meetings. We have emojis for, somebody does something that's represents relentless self-development, you'll get a little 4 emoji reaction in Slack. So we've taken our cultural principles, we've codified them, right? These are the things this is who we are when we're at our best, right? We believe in these things, right? And we've operationalized them into the conversation, into the way that we reward. By the way, when we do performance reviews, I don't know how many of you are doing performance reviews, but I think it's probably the most important mechanism of organizational development. We do them once a quarter. I think we're doing them even more often now in a more abbreviated form. But the 9 box, performance and potential that people are typically used to using in performance review, ours are performance and principles, right? How closely do you align to the organization's principles, right? Are you the kind of person, do you really believe in these things, and do they really show up and work, right? If they do, at the end of the day, that's even more important than potential, because some people are just incredible ICs and they should stay that way. And if they're performing well and they're aligned with the principles, they can do great things here.
Roy, we're just going to open it up to the crowd for a couple of questions. So maybe just Tova, do you want to ask your question? Tova Safra, would you like to unmute yourself?
Sure, yeah. So I was asking earlier, how do you identify and help somebody who might be struggling with this, something that might be new to them, an environment that isn't what they were used to before? How are you able to identify who needs some help and deliver it to them effectively?
Great question. So the only way to do that is make sure that you're hiring managers with a listening heart. That sounds super corny to say it that way, but I really mean it, right? The management layer of the business has to be uncompromisingly concerned, right, with the state of the people, the full, holistic, emotional, psychological, right, and productivity state of the individuals that they manage. Does that make sense, right? Which means you have a new kind of mandate for the kind of managers you hire. You're hiring emotionally intelligent people, right? Because it requires an even greater degree of emotional intelligence to sense someone who's struggling in an environment like this, right? If Tova shows up to work and she's, I've seen her a couple times because let's say I manage her and a team of 4 other people, it'll be pretty obvious if she's struggling, right? She'll look harried and she's frustrated, and maybe it starts to show up in meetings. In this environment, because Tova's like right now for me, Tova, you're like 1 inch by 1 inch little square of human on the screen, right? It's much harder for me to pick up on everything that's going on with you, right? So if we're not having a regular one-on-one, and I'm not designing that one-on-one to make sure that I'm concerned with all of you, right? Not just like, did you get this thing done? What's up with that thing? New, next, right? I'm actually concerned, right? And how do you force people to be concerned? You can't, right? You have to hire the kind of people who just are, right? You have to hire the kind of people who, believe in go-giving and go-getting and empathy, right? And if you don't have those kind of people, you can never, ever expect, you can't expect that to happen in your culture, right? Unless you find the kind of people who just naturally or operate that way. Does that make sense? But that's true for everything. But I give an example. We had something, just a personal story that happened less than 45 minutes ago. Apparently, one of our lead principal engineers had a fire in his home over the weekend and lost everything, right? Lost everything. He and his family are okay, but they've lost
Wow.
every single one of their possessions in a fire. I literally got this note 5 minutes before I got on this call. Right? If I seem distracted, that's what it was. And then literally within hours, one of his coworkers set up a GoFundMe page, and now the team has raised I don't even know how much money, thousands of dollars. I don't know, a lot. Let's see here. Go $4,000 in the last it's only 1:42 here in the East Coast. So in the last couple hours of business, they've raised $4,000 for this person. I can't make things like that happen, Tova, right? I can only encourage a culture by hiring the kinds of people that do that kind of thing intuitively, right? Whose instinct it is to care for the people around them, right? Who are giving in their nature beyond any mandate that comes down from the top. Right? If I said, hey, this guy lost his, possessions in a fire. Now where's the procedural handbook? We have to get a GoFundMe set up, and we have to show that we care. We have to send flowers. Believe me, I'm sure handfuls of people, in the company have already sent him and his family flowers beyond also, putting their money where their mouth and their heart obviously is, right? But you have to hire the kind of people who think that way and feel that way. And only then can you actually build an organization that is that way.
Okay, so we'll have one last question. Nikki, do you want to ask your question in person?
Sure, Clark. Thank you so much. It's been amazing. And I love, someone said on the chat, I love the focus has been on values, principles, work style. It's not the tech, it's the people you are. And I love that.
That's Jerusalem, by the way, Nikki, right? That's the reason that Roy and his partners here, this is why the reason your group is so important. Because nobody lives in it. No, you don't. Why do you live in Boston? I live in Boston because I was born in Boston. My parents were born in Boston, and so I'm here in Boston. Boston, I went to school in Boston, right? You ask somebody, why do you live in Yerushalayim? Why do you live in, how is that even a question? Where else could I live? You know what I'm saying, right? It's a purpose-driven reason for being who you are and being where you are, and does that make sense, right? So if you're not living and operating with purpose, I'm just not interested in that kind of business. It's not for me.
Well, it looks like you're hiring people that are purpose-driven and that are heart-driven, but also productive. So I've got a question, like one final question. During COVID, has this period affected everyone in your company in terms of productivity? Everyone's kids are home, their schedules are different, and how
dramatically. Dramatically, Nikki, dramatically. Okay. So, again, like we could say, hey, everybody, keep your kids in the other room. And it's really important that you this and this and this. We can create all kinds of boundaries, right? Just, you have to kind of expect that you're hiring people who understand, if they really do, right? Understand the mission we're on, right? The OKRs and the KPIs to ultimately deliver that mission. And they're principally convicted to get there, like with passion and with both hands, right? Start from a place of, hey, everybody, you all have kids in your house now. Those of you who have kids, right? Like, let's embrace that. So many meetings begin with show us your kids. Okay, this is like become a thing. In fact, I think, Nadav, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's like a kids all hand meeting that happens in the organization. That was once a week or something, right? Like where literally everybody shows up on one gigantic Zoom with their kids, right? And the kids get to know each other. I think there are
I love that.
Actually, there's like a whole, by the way, we have a COVID channel, and there's a homeschooling channel that's emerged, and people are sharing resources. Nadav actually is one of the most frequent and helpful sharers. right? People sharing like, here's videos that are interesting, here's home curriculum, it's great, right? There are people who have actually volunteered to teach classes to their coworkers' kids
Wow.
on Zoom. Like, hey, I don't know anything about kids, but I know how to paint. All right, anybody wants to show up to my painting class, send your kids onto Zoom and I'll teach them how to paint. I'll teach them how to draw. I'll teach them how to sing. I'll teach them how to whatever, right? So, the answer is yes, we're definitely affected by it. Our cultural principle would say, hey, we have to lean into the fact that you're human. Nobody apologizes. By the way, this happens all the time in meetings. The problem is you don't want to be the kind of company where it happens and then somebody freaks out. Because, by the way, I've been on one-on-one with sales executives or whatever, and a kid will pop on screen and be like, I'm so sorry, and they'll start shoving the kid, kicking the child, under the table, right? And so, Envision way, I think it's just, just be human. Hey,
Yeah,
I
love.
You have permission to be human and don't apologize for it.
Listen, I love that you've got that. It's what I've really heard about this conversation. It's about a culture, and I love it. Like I've taken my kids on a full journey of we see companies all day, every day. They interview every company with me, and we've like embraced it. Okay, this is what we're going to do today. So I love that you've taken that approach, and it's beautiful. So thank you for sharing so much of you.
Well, thank you. We're still learning. We're still iterating, and I make enough mistakes to grant myself the ability to be a little better every day.